What if I told you that the most beloved prayer in all of human history, a prayer recited by billions of people across thousands of years, was quietly altered in 1611, and that the original Hebrew says something so profound, so terrifying in its power, that the translators who worked on the King James Bible may have deliberately softened it because they weren't sure the world was ready to receive it? I want you to sit with that for a moment, because what I'm about to show you is not speculation. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is right there in the Hebrew text, waiting for anyone with eyes willing to see it. Let me tell you something personal. I have sat with Psalm 23 for over 40 years. I have read it at bedsides. I have read it at gravesites. I have read it in moments of such profound despair that the words felt like the only rope keeping me from falling into an abyss. And for most of those 40 years, I thought I understood this psalm completely. I was wrong. It wasn't until a very old teacher of mine, a man who had survived things I cannot bring myself to describe, sat me down and said, "You are reading David's words with someone else's eyes. Go back to the Hebrew. Go back to the original, and don't flinch at what you find there." That conversation changed everything. And today, I am passing it to you. If you stay with me until the very end of this teaching, you are going to walk away with something that cannot be found in any standard commentary, any Sunday sermon, or any other video on this platform. You are going to understand what David was actually saying, and you are going to know what to do with it. Before we go any further, let me ask you something honest. Have you ever recited Psalm 23 and felt a vague comfort without feeling a deep transformation? Have you ever said the words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," and then gone right back to wanting desperately, to lacking, to feeling abandoned by the very presence the psalm is supposed to guarantee? If that's you, then what I'm about to reveal is going to explain exactly why that has been happening. And it is going to stop today. Let's start at the very beginning, because the problem begins in the very first line. In English we read, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Beautiful, familiar, comforting. But in the original Hebrew, the line reads, "Adonai roi lo exar," and that word, exar, does not simply mean want in the sense of desire or longing. It does not mean, "I will feel content." The root of exar in Hebrew comes from a word that means to be severed, to be cut off, to be lacking in a way that threatens survival. David is not making a polite, gentle statement about contentment. He is making a declaration of absolute covenant protection. He is saying, "Because the Lord is the one shepherding me, I will never be cut off from what I need to live." That is a fundamentally different statement than what most people have been reciting their entire lives. One is a wish. The other is a war cry of faith. The Talmud, in Tractat Berachot, teaches us that when a person recites words of Torah or prayer, the divine presence listens not only to the sounds made by the mouth, but to the intention carried by the heart. The Hebrew term for this intention is kavanah, which means directed awareness, or the alignment of the inner self with the meaning of the words being spoken. Before I continue, let me share something with you. Everything I teach in these videos comes from a collection of 20 ancient psalms that my family has studied for generations, for money, protection, and destiny. I've put all of them together in one place, with the exact instructions on how to read each one, when to read them, and how many times. It's called The Hidden Rules of Jewish Wealth. The link is in the description below. Now, let me tell you what happens next. When you recite Psalm 23 without understanding that lo exar means you are covenantally protected from being severed, you are reciting powerful words with an impoverished intention. And the wisdom of the rabbis tells us clearly that prayer without kavanah is like a body without a soul. The form is there, but the life has gone out of it. This is the first reason so many people recite this psalm faithfully and still feel like nothing changes. They are holding a key, but they don't know what door it opens. But wait, because what I'm going to show you next is what the translators of 1611 almost certainly understood and chose not to fully render. And when you hear it, you will never read verse 4 the same way again. We need to talk about verse 4. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. This is perhaps the most quoted line in all of Scripture. People put it on gravestones. They whisper it in hospital rooms. They have it tattooed on their bodies. And yet the Hebrew of this verse contains a word that the King James translators rendered in a way that profoundly reduces its force. The Hebrew phrase is Gam ki elesh begay tzalmavet. That word, tzalmavet, is the one that concerns us. The translators broke it into two words, shadow and death, and called it the shadow of death. But many of the great Hebrew scholars, including those who worked before and after 1611, understood Zalmavet as a single compound word, an actual place name, a real designation for a kind of deep, terrifying darkness that goes beyond mere death. It is the darkness that exists before death arrives. It is the darkness of complete abandonment, of utter desolation, of walking through a place so forsaken that even light refuses to enter it. Why does this matter? Because David is not talking about a cemetery. He is not talking about facing mortality in some abstract philosophical sense. He is describing an actual experience of spiritual and emotional annihilation. He is describing a real valley that a real human soul can walk through. And he is saying something that should make your spine straighten. Even in that valley, even in the deepest, most terrifying darkness a human being can experience, the presence of the shepherd does not depart. The word gam at the beginning of that verse means even so, even so, even in that place, even in Zalmavet, even there the rod and the staff are with you, even there you are not cut off, even there, lo exar. I want to tell you about a man I will call Yosef, because this is a story that requires privacy. Yosef came to me during a period of his life. If what I'm sharing today is touching your spirit, then you need the complete guide. 20 psalms, each one decoded with the exact ritual for money, protection, and breaking curses. My family guarded this for generations. I wasn't supposed to share it, but you need it now. The hidden rules of Jewish wealth. The link is right below this video. Go get it before we continue. When he had lost nearly everything, his business had collapsed. His marriage was under severe strain. He had not slept more than a few hours in weeks. And he told me, with a kind of hollow exhaustion in his eyes, that he had been reciting Psalm 23 every single morning for 3 years, every morning, without fail, and he felt absolutely nothing. He looked at me and he said, "Rabbi, I don't understand. I'm doing everything right. Why isn't this working?" And I asked him one question. I said, "Yosef, when you say I shall not want, what do you believe you are saying?" He thought for a moment. He said, "I think I'm saying that I trust God to provide for me eventually." I said, "No, you are saying that you are covenantally protected from being severed from what you need right now, not eventually, right now. The protection is already active the moment the shepherd's presence is acknowledged. You have been asking for a promise that has already been given." That conversation was the turning point for Yosef, not because I told him anything magical, because I helped him read what was already written. Within that same week, he received a call that opened a completely unexpected door in his business. He wept when he told me, not because of the call, because he finally understood what he had been saying for 3 years without truly hearing it. Now, here is where the teaching gets even deeper, and I want you to pay very close attention, because this is what almost nobody explains. The psalm shifts in a way that most people miss entirely. In the first few verses, David speaks about God in the third person. He says, "He makes me lie down, He leads me, He restores my soul." He is describing God from a certain spiritual distance as one who benefits from a shepherd's care. But then, suddenly, in verse 4, the grammar changes. David stops saying he and starts saying you. He says, "For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me." This is not an accident. In the original Hebrew, this shift is unmistakable and deliberate. David moves from speaking about God to speaking directly to God. And this happens exactly at the moment he enters the valley of deepest darkness. The most intimate encounter with the divine, the shift from he to you, happens not at the mountaintop, not in a moment of abundance and celebration, but in the lowest, darkest, most terrifying place a human soul can inhabit. David is teaching us something extraordinary. The darkness does not drive God away. The darkness is where God becomes most present. The darkness is where the relationship moves from description to direct address, from theology to encounter. The rabbis discuss this in a beautiful way. There is a teaching that says that just as a parent will rush most urgently to the side of a child who is crying in fear, so the divine presence rushes most powerfully toward a soul that is walking through its darkest hour. The valley of Tzalmavet is not a place of abandonment. It is a place of the most direct, unmediated encounter with the Holy One. But you can only experience that encounter if you know it is available. If you believe, as so many have been taught, that darkness means divine absence, you will walk through your valley completely alone because you will not reach out to a presence you believe has withdrawn. This is the lie that the softened translation helps to maintain. When you call it merely the shadow of death, it sounds manageable. When you understand it as David wrote it, as the deepest darkness, as Tzalmavet, as a place of profound desolation, and you understand that even there God says, "I am with you," the transformation is radical, because now you know that your worst moment is not a sign of abandonment. It is an invitation to the most intimate encounter. Let me give you the second story, because this one comes directly from the rabbinic tradition, and it illuminates everything we have been discussing. There is a midrash, a rabbinic teaching, about King David himself. It tells us that before David ever composed this psalm, he underwent a period of what we might call divine hiding. Not divine absence, but divine hiding, what the tradition calls hester panim, the concealment of the divine face. This was during the period of his deepest disgrace, when his own son Absalom had turned the entire kingdom against him, when David was forced to flee Jerusalem on foot, weeping, with his head covered, his sandals removed as a sign of mourning. He had nothing. He had lost the throne. He had lost his family's loyalty. He had lost his dignity in front of the entire nation. The people who had celebrated him were now cursing him in the streets. And according to the Midrash, it was during this period of total desolation, while David walked in exile and humiliation, that he composed the deepest spiritual insights of his psalms. The beauty and the power of his poetry came not from the palace, but from the valley. The green pastures of verse 2 were not visible to him when he wrote about them. He was in the desert. He wrote of the still waters from a place of profound thirst. He wrote, "You are with me," in a moment when God felt completely hidden. That is not delusion. That is not wishful thinking. That is the highest exercise of faith. Faith is not the ability to believe in God's goodness when everything is easy. Faith is the declaration of God's goodness from the depths of the valley, when everything in your circumstances screams the opposite. And this brings us to something terrifying in the most magnificent sense of the word. The original Hebrew of verse 5 contains a line that the 1611 translators rendered this way: "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies," familiar to most of us. But the Hebrew word translated as preparest is ta'aroch, from the root ayin resh kaf, which in its fullest meaning carries connotations not just of setting out a meal, but of arranging for combat, of marshalling forces, of setting something in battle formation. The same root is used in other books of the Bible to describe armies being arranged for war. David is not simply saying that God sets out a nice dinner for him while his enemies watch and feel jealous. He is saying that God arranges, marshals, and deploys provision for him in full view of everything arrayed against him. The table is not a dinner party. The table is a demonstration of divine power. It is God saying to every force of opposition in your life, "Look at what I am doing for the one who is in my presence. Look at how I supply, how I arrange, how I deploy resources for those who are mine." The meal is an act of warfare. The blessing is a battle formation. If you have been struggling, if you have been waiting for something to break through, if you have been in your own version of the valley and wondering why the provision feels so slow, so small, so insufficient, I want you to hear this. The table is being arranged. The Hebrew says it is being arranged in active, deliberate, military formation, in the presence of your enemies, not after they leave, not when things get easier. In their presence. Your breakthrough is not something that will happen when the opposition stops. It is something that happens in direct view of the opposition. That is what David saw. That is what he wrote. And that is what was softened in 1611. Here is where the practical teaching begins. And I want you to receive this with full attention, because this is what you can do starting tonight. The practice I am going to give you is rooted in a tradition called Kiryat HaTorah B'Kavana, the reading of sacred texts with directed intention. It is a practice that my teachers passed to me, and their teachers passed to them, tracing back through centuries of rabbinic wisdom. It is not complicated, but it requires that you be fully present, completely awake, spiritually alert. First, I want you to choose a time tonight before you sleep. The tradition favors the period just before midnight or just before you close your eyes, because in that liminal space between waking and sleep, the receptivity of the soul is heightened. Sit in a quiet place. Remove distractions. This should take you no longer than 15 minutes, but give it those 15 minutes completely. Second, read Psalm 23 once, slowly, in whatever language you have. But as you read it, hold these three realities consciously in your mind. When you say, "I shall not want," remember that the Hebrew says, "You will not be severed." Say it internally, "I will not be cut off." When you arrive at verse 4 and you speak to the valley, make the shift that David made. When you say, "You are with me," let those be words spoken directly to the divine, not about the divine. And when you reach verse 5, visualize the table being arranged not as a comfort, but as a declaration of war on your behalf. Third, after you have read the psalm, spend 3 minutes in silence, not asking for anything, not listing your needs, simply acknowledging the presence of the shepherd. The Talmud teaches in Tractate Berachot that there is a level of prayer that transcends petition, the level where a person simply rests in the awareness of divine proximity. That resting place, that quiet after the reading, is itself a form of the still water David describes in verse 2. It is where the soul is restored. It is where Loexah becomes not just a declaration, but an experience. Fourth, and this is the step that most people skip, speak aloud one specific thing that you are trusting will be provided. Not a vague request, something specific. A debt that needs to be cleared, a relationship that needs to be restored, a door that needs to open. Speak it as if the table is already being arranged for it, because according to what David understood, it is. Do this every night for 7 consecutive nights. Not because the number 7 is magical, but because 7 days is the unit of creation in Torah, and there is a principle in rabbinic thought that when we align our practice with the rhythm of creation, we invite creative restoration into our situation. 7 nights of this practice, done with full kavana, full directed intention, will begin to shift something. Not because of superstition, because you will have spent 7 evenings retraining your spiritual attention to receive what has already been promised. There is one more thing I need to tell you, and I say this as your teacher and as your friend. The reason so many people live in the valley indefinitely is not because God is absent. It is because they have accepted a version of the psalm that makes the valley sound permanent. The English, the valley of the shadow of death, implies a permanent geographical feature, a place you live near, a darkness that defines your landscape. But the Hebrew says, Gam ki elech, meaning, even as I walk through. Through. The valley of Tzalmavet is not a place you are meant to inhabit. It is a place you walk through. The shepherd does not abandon you in the valley. The shepherd walks you out of it, but you must be moving, you must be walking. David was fleeing Jerusalem in humiliation and exile, and he was still moving forward. The restoration came because he did not stop. He walked through, and God walked with him, every step, even through Tzalmavet. Let me bring this all together for you now, because I want these truths to settle deeply into your heart before we close. David did not write a poem of gentle comfort, designed to make you feel vaguely better about a difficult life. He wrote a covenant declaration, a legal, spiritual, binding statement of what the relationship between a human being and the divine actually guarantees. He wrote it from the bottom of his darkest valley. He wrote it with the grammar of direct encounter, shifting from he to you at the exact moment of deepest darkness. He wrote a word for that darkness, Tzalmavet, that the translators of 1611 rendered more gently than David intended. And he described a table being arranged for him with the language of military deployment, not of polite hospitality. This is not the psalm of a man in a comfortable chair. This is the psalm of a man in exile, in shame, in loss, declaring with absolute certainty that the shepherd has not let go, that he will not be severed, that the table is being arranged, that the darkness is not abandonment, but the place of most intimate encounter, that goodness and mercy, in Hebrew, tov v'chesed, meaning unconditional loving kindness, will pursue him. The word in Hebrew for follow in that last verse is yirdefuni, which more accurately means to pursue, to chase, to hunt. Goodness is hunting you. Loving kindness is in pursuit of you. You do not have to chase blessing down. Blessing is chasing you, even now. Do not leave this teaching on a shelf. Do not say, that was interesting, and close the window and go back to the same patterns that have been keeping you in the valley. Tonight, before you sleep, open the psalm. Read it slowly. Make the shift from he to you. Remember that the valley is something you walk through, not something you live in. Remember that the table is being arranged for you right now, in the presence of whatever opposition is surrounding you, and speak your specific request aloud with the confidence of someone who knows that the shepherd has already activated the covenant of Lo Exar. You are not alone in your valley. You have never been alone there. And the darkness that has felt like abandonment is the very place where the divine face is closest to yours, waiting for you to lift your eyes and make direct address. Yehi ratzon milfanecha, Adonai Eloheinu velohei avotenu, shitvaresh et kol hakore badavarim haele bavanim uvavaut, bapanasa uvabriut, uvshalom amiti. May it be your will, Lord our God and God of our fathers, that you bless everyone who has received these words with children, with livelihood, with health, and with true and lasting peace. If this teaching has reached something inside you that needed reaching, please share it with someone who is walking through their own valley right now. You may not know how desperately they need to hear that they will not be cut off. You may save someone simply by passing these words along. Subscribe to this channel, because every week I bring teachings exactly like this one. Teachings rooted in the deepest wells of our tradition, designed not to make you feel good for a moment, but to change the way you read, the way you pray, and the way you walk through whatever valley you are in. You deserve the full text. You deserve the original meaning. You deserve to know what was actually written, and I will keep bringing it to you.